Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, whose job is it anyway? Who should be helping new team members to engage? What's funny or insulting? Are introverts poor negotiators? And a discussion with David Simmons. David is a free man of the Guild of HR Professionals and one of the few people I know who put HR and analytics into the same sentence. He is the first global auditor for BS 30414, which helps people measure the ROI of HR. Most interestingly, he's talking about what HR's role is and why they should be, but haven't always been, on the board. As a numbers man, I'm looking forward to this discussion, as I'm sure are many of the HR related listeners and leaders. But also, as an introvert, there's some interesting pieces for you too. This week, I spent most of my weekend at the Professional Speaking Association's conference. So, less topical news links than normal, but a couple of interesting thoughts from the PSA's conference, which is going to touch on introvert humour and exhaustion. But in the news, perhaps, hopefully, the last of the odd petrol panic behaviour. A mortar tanker driver in Northamptonshire has revealed how he was tailed by around 20 cars for fuel and was actually challenged when one of the drivers realised he was not heading towards a petrol station. The man at the front actually said, "You could have stopped and told us you weren't a petrol tanker," Johnny Anderson told the BBC. So whose job is it? I mean, bit obvious really. Was it really the tanker driver's job to do that? But whose job is it? If your team are not settling in properly, if your new staff member isn't mixing with the team, who should be doing it? Of course, it's theirs. But also yours. Why are they not fitting in? Is it a cliquey culture? Is it an introvert not being ready to break in and take their time? And what can you do about that? I mentioned the PSA earlier, which had their annual conference this weekend. It's taken me a lot more time to get to know the group well, where others got to that place a lot more quickly. Me, I work slowly on some relationships. I don't feel comfortable rushing out and saying "hi" to everybody, although what did help was having a role where I had to go and do just that. At one point during the conference, I was running a discussion point where people could drop in and talk about activating introverts. And we had a couple of these, and you know what those kind of things are like. People turn up for the first 1 or 2 minutes of the discussion. So rather than get started into the deep stuff, I thought I'd start off with some introvert humour. How much does the average introvert weigh? Not enough to break the ice. I adapted one from Will Kintish, a previous guest on the show and good friend. How can you tell if an accountant is an introvert or an extrovert? The extroverted accountant looks at your shoes while talking, the introvert her own. Why did the introvert polish his shoes regularly? So he could see people's faces. Yeah, I know, you've kind of got the measure of these now. Of course, the interesting thing is, are they humorous or are they insulting? There's a new perfume for introvert ladies, Leave Me Alone cologne. 2 introverts walk into a room, 1 leaves. An introvert knock-knock joke. Knock-knock. An introvert walks into a bar. No, sorry, was thinking of someone else. The introvert stayed at home. You think you're introverted? Wait till you never meet me. Now, of course, the interesting thing in some discussions is some people will see these immediately as insulting. Other people find them humorous. I'm trying to work it out myself, if I'm honest. So I'd love to know what you think. And there's a LinkedIn post, which is mentioned in the show notes, that you can go and jump on. What was funny was how I needed to recover from the weekend. It was a remote conference, and yet I was still peopled out by the end of it. For me, it was really simple. I went, put on my black rubber gear, and jumped under the water. My personal flotation chamber, floating around underneath Swanage Pier for an hour. Wonderful. And then I got out and stood on a paddleboard for another hour as I worked my way round the bay. How do you recover? Do you plan recovery time? Because if you can, it can really, really help. But anyway, that's probably enough of that for now. Let's have that conversation with David. David, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Just before we get into this thing about numbers and HR, and I know there's something you're very passionate about, which is embracing transformation in HR through the people. For me, one of the really core pieces about people is I always ask my guests, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Yes, thank you. That's not the first time I've been asked that question. And yes, I have done various psychometric tests and all those kind of things. And yes, I am aware of the work of Carl Jung, and he was a crazy mixed up fool. My wife would certainly agree that I was more introverted, and I would agree that she's more extroverted. And so we kind of rub along together. Yeah, it's okay.
I like that. And what kind of impact has introversion had on you in your career, perhaps?
I'm very happy with my own company, and I am enriched and energized by a bit of peace and quiet, whereas my wife desperately needs people all the time.
So analytics and HR, for many people, they'd say those two can't go together.
Well, I would agree. And with the best will in the world, most people in HR are lovely, lovely people. I have a theory that many people in HR hated the maths teacher. And numbers in HR are relatively new. Obviously, these are huge generalizations. Nevertheless, I think that a lot of people in HR have been saying for years, they've been banging on the door of the boardroom saying, we want to get into the boardroom, give us a seat on the board, not realizing that in the boardroom, it's a different language, graphs and charts and numbers and spreadsheets. And so I think we need to grow up, we need to mature, we need to become business managers as much as HR managers. And my passion is not just about the numbers or the metrics or the analytics. I want to shift HR as a profession. It's been stuck for too long in the mire of transactions and admin and service function and tedium. I want to shift it away from that into taking its rightful place in the boardroom and its role as an organizational leader of transformation and change. If we're really going to embrace strategy meaningfully, we have to talk the same language as the CFO, the CIO, and the CEO. And then we can lead change through the people. And every time it hits the bottom line.
So what is it you think that causes this? I think you said before that leaders and board members sometimes struggle to communicate with HR people. What's behind that?
I think there's a misperception, a misunderstanding. Stereotypically, people in HR are viewed as being pink and fluffy. They're lovely people, but they lack a kind of gravitas, which unfortunately on occasions has been valid. I think that's changing. And I think that those of us in HR now need to grow up. We need to show what we're good at. And increasingly those with qualifications in HR are embracing analytics and business speak, not just talking about tea and toilets.
So what type of numbers are we talking about when we talk about this?
For example, you may have heard that at the moment there's something called the big resignation. Because of COVID-19 and the furlough scheme and people working from home, a huge number of people are now saying, oh, I quite like this remote working or this hybrid working. Maybe I won't carry on working for this organization, or I'll go part-time, or I'll go independent, or whatever they say. We can actually put some numbers against that, but more importantly, we can either slow that down or prevent it, or we can go forward and say, if this continues, how can we deal with it in terms of losing people, retaining people, recruiting? So
from your numbers perspective, if I can put it like that, certainly a higher level perspective than many of us look, what do you think future of work and home working, hybrid working and productivity is likely to be?
I personally believe that hybrid working is here to stay. to a greater or lesser extent. And it's interesting, some organizations are saying, oh no, everybody must go back to the office. And others are saying, no, everybody can decide from day one where they would like to work. Obviously, it all depends on the organizational culture and inevitably the sector that you're in. I mean, retail is difficult to work from home, except those in the head office. I think remote working, hybrid working is here to stay. In terms of productivity, what we're finding is that productivity and performance have stayed static or, in fact, have gone up by those working from home.
Oh, wow.
Partly because of reduced stress, partly because of more time, because you're not having to commute, but also because people are starting to take more responsibility. The old approach to management and leadership, which was, if I can't see you, I can't trust you, that's being questioned. So that now people who are working at home or maybe in a serviced office or a coffee shop, they're saying, I need to grab my job, my career, my life, and I will take responsibility for what I do and when I do it. And if I take half an hour off to go to the dentist or pick the kids up from school, I'm very happy to put in an extra half an hour later on in the day. And that I think is more mature.
Absolutely. And it's quite refreshing to see. Do you think there's a problem, if I can use that word, where different types of people are much more suited to working from home or working in the office?
Well, that's interesting. You should ask that, John. And I mean, we go back to the original question about introversion, extroversion. I can give you an example. I've got 4 sons, and my youngest son works in IT. He lives alone, and during COVID, he worked from home. He probably is somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and it caused huge mental health problems for him. He's stuck at home all day, every day on his own. Now, he's the kind of person who actually thrives on being alone. And yet, nevertheless, he missed the socialization. And his organization did encourage him to go back to work. And he was scared stiff for a long time to go on the tune and the tray. But now he is going back in, and he's benefiting from the little chats, what we used to call the water cooler moments.
Absolutely.
I mean, Zoom is great, but you have to make an appointment, and it seems a bit formal, and you can't really allow yourself to chat about the football last night or my latest dress or whatever it is that people talk about.
But we do need to do that because it glues people together.
The socialization of work, the social aspects of work are those areas which have perhaps been neglected in the past, which have now come to the forefront. I think also organizations are repurposing their offices. They don't need such big office blocks, and we don't need so many cubicles. So many organizations now saying, right, let's reconfigure the space so that it's more for social aspects, it's for parties, it's for client-facing presentations, it's for induction courses, training, and so on. And those are all the social aspects which you get out of coming together.
Just changing tack slightly, one question I'd love to know, final really tiny question for you, he says, laughing. How can leaders drive people performance in their business? So it's just a tiny one to finish with.
I think it's a good question, but personally, I think it's the wrong question. If leaders have got their eye on performance and productivity and outcomes, I think they'll miss it. Personally speaking, and I think a number of people would agree with me, it's not about the outcomes and the outputs, it's about the people. And therefore, it's about employee engagement, it's about motivation, it's about respect and dignity. It's all the areas around diversity and inclusion. It's about knowing the individual. There was a fabulous book many, many years ago called The 1 Minute Manager.
I loved that book.
It was a classic of its time. And basically the message there was, let's spend some time with each person. And we only needs a minute a day. And we can talk about little Jimmy who's been to the dentist, or we can talk about the favorite football club that he supports and whatever. Because then it's about engaging with the individual. And guess what? Performance and productivity go through the roof.
So performance and productivity go through the roof when we engage with individuals.
Absolutely.
And one of the big things is about embracing and using numbers, using metrics to embrace transformation of HR rather than going, it's all about numbers.
Definitely.
Fantastic, thank you. What I'd like to do is finish off with a couple of tips, if I could. One for an introvert to drive their performance, and one for a non-introvert.
I'm unusual that I can tip over from introversion to extroversion. I am an introvert. I do value my own space. And yet there is a part of me that quite likes doing presentations and performances. And it's still me, but it's a different part of me that doesn't show itself very often. And I'm remembering a presentation I did a couple of years ago in Brazil. There was 100 professors and PhD people in the audience. And they just gave me a roving mic and I had my PowerPoints and the presentation was supposed to last 20 minutes. Well, I was still going after 40 minutes and loving every minute of it. I suppose the tip would be pretend. Just allow. I mean, the confidence comes from the preparation and knowledge of the subject, of course.
Very much.
But allow yourself
skills,
to. Yeah, very much. And the other side, a tip for those of us who are extroverts, they would have found COVID very difficult being locked down. And so that would have given them an insight into the life of introverts who quite like being locked down sometimes.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. How can listeners get back in touch with you?
Yes, if people go on to hcmmetrics.co.uk, they'll find out everything about me and the organization and the brand new standard ISO 30414, which is about HR reporting. hcmmetrics.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, David. It's been lovely to talk to you.
John, it's been a delight.
Introvert question of the week. Do introverts make poor negotiators? And this one might seem like a daft question, but 12% of people who were polled said yes. 14% said perhaps. It's a bit of setup. Derek Arden, good friend of mine, had asked the question because he's a negotiation expert and he'll be on the show in a few weeks' time. But very definitely 74% of this audience said no. But of course, why is it a relevant question? Many people perceive negotiation to be a tough, conflict-driving, extroverted and probably egotistical behaviour, which doesn't sound all that introverted. How do you perceive negotiation and introversion? Definitely come and jump in a couple of weeks' time when we talk about extroversion, introversion and negotiation with Derek Arden. Brilliant discussion with David this week about HR and related introvert issues. My quick summary, it's not all about numbers, it's about embracing transformation. It's about getting full rights in the boardroom in driving change with real impact and allowing organisations to transform through people. And of course, there was that interesting piece on the big resignation, an HR-related issue to people adjusting post-pandemic to new working practices. Or not, by the sound of the title there. Anyway, look forward to seeing you next week. I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintroVert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.